Hey guys, this is Chris from Harm's Way, and you're listening to Toilet of Hell.
You're listening to 66.6 FM, Radio TOVH, The Flush.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the third season of Toilet Radio. We're going to have bigger guests, new sound effects, new jokes. We might, I don't know, we might make fun of a different genre of music this time. I'm Joe Thrash and Kill. With me, I've got 365 Days of Horror. How's it going, man?
It is going well. We're in a new year. Woo!
Ooh. We got a really cool guest on the show today. We got Chris of one of my favorite modern bands, Harm's Way. So we're going to talk about their new record. We're going to talk about their old records. We're going to talk about Getting Hella Swole. We're going to talk about negativity and positivity and Straightedge. How does that sound?
That sounds pretty good. All things I like.
Yeah, I like most of those things. Figure before we get into it, you know, we'll make you guys wait a little bit to hear the goods, and you're gonna have to endure me and Jordan talking a bit. How did you stumble into hardcore?
I think I kind of found hardcore somewhat after finding nu metal. It's kind of like what was popular at the time, at least in terms of heavy music. And I think it really came about thanks to like compilation albums that I used to get at shows. Like that was a big deal in forming what bands I like. Now you can just listen to just about anything you want at any time on any device that you have. But back then it was like, here's this free CD with 30 bands you've never heard of. And a couple of them were from like hardcore labels like Stillborn or Trustkill or even Victory back before they were completely terrible. And I think that's kind of what got me into hardcore for at least a little while.
Yeah. I think I fell into it the same way that a lot of people do, is that, you know, you have friends that are in the know. So I've mentioned on the show before, I grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere, so I was a little bit behind on literally everything. After nu metal, I, you know, just kind of listened to whatever metal shit and punk shit that my friends had, and then eventually came across Terror. that was my gateway. Aside from like the faster, shorter Dead Kennedys tracks, I didn't really care for those as much as the weird surf stuff. Yeah, it was like Terror and in Madball were how I found hardcore, and then, you know, from there I got way into I don't know what you would call it, the more knuckle dragging into things. Like I really dug this probably isn't a name that anyone's heard in a long time, like Life Ruiner.
Oh yeah, I remember that name.
That was a lot of fun. I think that I used to scour the MP3 blogs. Do you remember those? Like
mp3.com?
Well, it was similar. It was dudes that would like maintain a blog specific to genres, and they would have like little mirror link downloads to download their compilations. Like I dug Toxic Breed's Funhouse was one that I followed a lot back in the day. He used to do, in addition to, you know, just making new hardcore records available for download, he would do compilations as well. They were all pretty good shit. So, but yeah, those are long yesteryear. Anyway, eventually I found Harm's Way when they put out their record Isolation on Death Wish, and that was man, that one just blew my mind because it was just so fucking heavy to me. I think everybody has a couple of moments. If you're an extreme music fan, you have a couple of moments and a couple of bands in your life where it seems like you've just uncovered a new, unknown level of heaviness. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I can definitely think of a few bands and moments, and I can even picture them in my mind right now, just where you hear something or even see a video and go, yes, this is it. This is what I like.
Do you remember any of those specifically?
I'm a big Sworn Enemy fan, and I remember seeing their video for their song Sworn Enemy on Fuse TV, which used to be Much Music. They had the show Uranium with Julia, and it was just something I'd never really heard of before. And it was like really straightforward and in your face, but still kind of in the realm of metal. And I think that kind of was a big gateway moment for me to be interested in other genres.
Yeah. I remember I picked up some compilation or another for like $1 at the record store, and it had Dillinger Escape Plan's 42% burnt on it, and that just knocked my dick clean off. Like I had never heard anything that heavy before, and I fell in love with that. And then years later in the future, I heard the opening track from Isolation on Harm's Way's record. It's called Scrambled, and like it's kind of got a little I don't know, drony kind of Meshuggah-y intro before it just blows like completely apart, and it was mind boggling for me. It was around the same time that I started really getting into lifting weights and making like a big fitness change in my life. So I think every like personal record for like amount of weight lifted was probably while listening to a song on that record. So I'm just beyond pleased that we got to do this show.
Yeah, I think it's a really good interview, and I think with a band like Harm's Way, for some of the people that don't really know them, I think this new record that's coming out on Metal Blade is going to be like a gateway into a new genre, even for like old metal fans, because it's super heavy.
Yes.
And it really bridges the gap. I think 'cause when people think of hardcore, I think they kind of go back to like the old New York sound, the Sick of It Alls, Agnostic Front, kind of the more punk stuff. And I really think it's evolved over the past like 15 years to really incorporate a lot of metal. And Harm's Way has done that a lot.
Honestly, I think that the difference now between a band that claims hardcore versus a band that reps himself as metal, like there's not a huge. They've meshed so seamlessly that it comes down to, I think, fashion choices really, or like I guess how you would value your community. So that's my hot take on the matter anyway. But yeah, this new record, the band itself, they've been combining elements of like industrial, like a Godflesh type sound with these heavy ass riffs for a while, and I think that makes it even all the heavier. So Chris Mills on the show in a couple of minutes. This is the first show of a new year. Last year, when we did the first show of the year, we said that we were gonna do basically a better job of our podcast, which I think in that first season it's a little rough. We weren't really sure what we were doing, but last year we hit the books. We got a bunch of really big guests. We flexed our head to do strange conceptual shows. What do you want to do this year, man?
Oh, geez. Make lots of money and do this as our real job?
That would be fucking dope. There's a way that we could make that happen. Listeners, we do have a Patreon. If you want to go to patreon.com/toiletofhell, you can see a number of options for funneling money to us so that we can quit our jobs and do this podcast full time and buy drugs and beautiful women and jet skis.
I mean, I absolutely love doing this show. If you could pay us to do this, I would do this every day. I would do live streams of this, just hours and hours of nonsense.
I think people would get really sick of me quickly.
Well, if they've been with us this long, I think you got them locked in.
Yeah, that's fair. Suckers. I don't know, man. What other hardcore shit did you really get into?
I like Zao or Zao, however you want to call him. I always said Zao because like the word Taoism is Tao, so I always read it like that. Sick of It All. Hatebreed for like a minute when everyone else liked them, and then kind of moved away from that. Blacklisted, I went to Hellfest back in 2004, all 3 days, so it was a lot of hardcore and a lot of kind of hardcore adjacent bands. I know you like 100 Demons.
Yeah, yep. I like it extra ignorant.
Yeah, I think that's kind of eventually what turned me off a little bit to hardcore is more of the live ignorant aspect, dealing with crews and idiots punching each other in the back of the head and crowd killing, and I kind of pulled back for a while.
I got punched in the back of the head seeing Razzle-Dazzle. And if you guys aren't familiar with Razzle-Dazzle, they're kind of a joke band. One or more of those dudes is occasionally in Cold World, which is a little bit more self-serious. But like, it's very Beastie Boys-ish music. They put out music on Lock and Out. My favorite track of theirs is Strictly Saucers, which is about foods that are round. That's it. It's like pizza, donuts, foods that are round. So I got punched in the back of the head seeing those guys, and that really soured me for a good while.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to shows where I've seen straight up like 5-on-1 beatdown assaults. I've had friends threatened. It took the fun out of it.
Yeah, and I guess where you're from, there's definitely more of a crew type scene, right?
Yeah, there is a heavy dosage of crews. I guess for people who don't know, it's essentially just a loose-knit gang that's centered around hardcore music, more or less.
Yeah, yeah. Because violence is way cooler when it's you and your buddies committing acts of violence. We don't really have that here. We just have one guy who every time I see him, I just know that like a ton of people are going to get fucking crowd killed because he's an asshole.
I hate that. It's so unnecessary.
Yeah.
It really ruins the fun for everyone. I don't understand how it's still a thing in now 2018.
It is such a basic thing, dude. Like, you get in the pit, you run into each other, there's a little bit of contact, a little bit of bruises, but nobody's like, you're not supposed to hurt somebody.
And they'll specifically target people in the crowd. They'll hit young kids. They'll hit women. It's insane.
Yeah. And I gotta tell you, there's nothing cooler than like a late 20s dude that's still doing that. Like, the coolest guy.
Well, it gets his mind off of his alimony.
What do you say we play some Harm's Way before we get into this interview?
I think that's a good idea.
Let's do that, man. I tell you what, we're gonna play this track, the one that blew my mind back years ago. We're gonna play "Scrambled" by Harm's Way from the record Isolation, and we're gonna end this show with their latest single from their upcoming record. How about that?
That sounds good, and cover your head because I'm about to dive and crowd kill you.
Yeah, man. Stage dives all over. We have a very, very special guest with us today on the show. Drummer of one of my favorite modern bands. We've got Chris Mills of Harm's Way. Chris, how you doing?
Doing good, man. Happy to be here.
We're stoked to talk with you. You've got a new record coming out soon, Post-Human, and I heard the first single from it recently, and it gave me kind of the same feeling that I got when I first heard Scrambled from Isolation, and that this was just something that was heavier than anything like I feel like I had ever heard before. Back when Isolation dropped, I guess that was about right when I started lifting weights seriously, and I listened to a lot of Harm's Way the entire way. What can we expect from this new record?
Well, first off, thanks for, sticking by us through all these years. It's crazy to think that Isolation, came out 6 years ago at this point. So off the bat, thanks for sticking around. But yeah, with Post-Human, I think people can expect, what they can expect from, many of the previous Harm's Way releases, just kind of a relentless sort of force, so to speak, but a lot of progression and experimentation and kind of texture and dynamics. We definitely stayed true to our style in that sense. Just trying to like push ourselves, push the boundaries, kind of push the barriers of music in general. So I think for anyone who kind of knows us as a band, they can expect that continued progression and evolution. And I think for kind of new fans and new listeners, they can expect a range from super heavy to very ambient and kind of dynamic and very textured and very layered.
Awesome. I think on your last record, it seemed like there was a real combination of hardcore and death metal, and a lot of industrial as well. Can we expect more of the industrial vibe on this new one?
Yeah, that's definitely something that has continued to kind of incorporate itself in our sound, and it's definitely become more refined over the years. So I think for people who are kind of entering this record not really knowing what to expect, they can definitely expect some industrial. Obviously, those death metal components are still there. And as a band, obviously we're kind of rooted in the hardcore world, so to speak. But there's definitely still those hardcore undertones and that kind of punk rock mentality to it, so to speak.
Sick. So the band itself has been around in some form or another for, is it almost 15 years now?
It's been about 11 years. The band started roughly like towards the end of 2006. So,
Gotcha.
So we're around 11 years or so.
At what point did you guys decide that you were going to really take it seriously and put your effort into it?
It was around the time that we had a self-titled 7-inch come out after our first 7-inch, Imprisoned. And we just we kind of wrote these 2 songs, released them, and this was after we had just done like a winter tour off Imprisoned, and which we weren't really anticipating it, but it went a lot better than we were expecting. So it was around the time that our self-titled 7-inch came out that had Delusion and Repression on it, and we kind of released that record, and it caught some steam, and we were able to do some shows. We went out to the West Coast with Weekend Nachos for the first time on that record, and the reception was awesome. So we kind of started taking the band more serious after that. Reality Approaches would come out about a year and a half later. And at that time, the band was still very much a hobby, so to speak. We did it in our spare time between jobs and between, breaks from school and whatnot. So Reality Approaches came out. The record did fairly well, but, I'd say that the band really kind of took shape and took focus and became a priority for us probably around the release of No Gods, No Masters. So that was the 7-inch right before Isolation. And it was around that time that we had, a couple member changes. John from Weekend Nachos left the band. Our other friend John, who was playing guitar, had also left the band. And it was kind of just Bo, James, and I, who were just kind of like the core members who were kind of still there. We kind of made a conscious decision to write another record and just like, put our all into it, and just kind of took it from there. And it was at that time that with No Gods that, the sound kind of took a more metallic approach. And we kind of just, kept moving forward from there.
Yeah, Weekend Nachos, I guess, called it quits. It was either late last year or early this year. Did you also played their farewell tour as well? Is that correct?
Yeah, well, we played their last show. They did 2 shows in Chicago, and we were lucky enough to be a part of one of those shows. They've been kind of like our brother band, over the years, since the birth of Harm's Way. So, we've done a lot together over the years, a lot of tours together, a lot of hanging out, all that kind of stuff. So, they ended up calling it quits around January, I believe. And, we're lucky enough to be a part of that last show, and it was awesome.
This new record's going to be your first on Metal Blade. So what is it like as a straight edge hardcore band? I mean, being signed to the same labels, like Cannibal Corpse and Anvil.
Yeah, we're definitely not Cannibal Corpse or Anvil, but I like Metal Blade because of their kind of diverse catalog, and they've been a staple of aggressive music for a number of years now. And in many ways they kind of brought metalcore to the masses in some ways with As I Lay Dying and Unearthed and bands of that nature. So, while in some ways it may seem like we are kind of the oddball band on the roster, I feel like it's a perfect fit. For us, when we decided to make kind of the jump to Metal Blade and to start working with them, it felt like a natural progression. It felt like the next step for us, especially for what some of our long-term goals are with the band. And, one of the biggest being, just to continue to keep growing and to connect with as many listeners as we can. And obviously Metal Blade has its place in the aggressive music world and, has its own cult following. And we felt like, it'd be a great relationship to have in order to continue to grow. And like I said, just to connect with more listeners across the globe.
What's your favorite Metal Blade band, and why is it the Goo Goo Dolls?
So it's definitely the Goo Goo Dolls. And yeah, I mean, Buffalo, New York, working class pride, Yeah, it's funny actually when we first started working with Mike Faley, who does A&R, and he's a big part of the label. That was one of the first questions we had for him. Like, yeah, like how did that whole Goo Goo Dolls thing happen? And he's originally from Buffalo, and I guess he was the big kind of connection between the Goo Goo Dolls and Metal Blade, and it was a real eye opener, and it was interesting to kind of hear those early stories on how that relationship started between the Goo Goo Dolls and Metal Blade.
It's one of my favorite pieces of like metal trivia, because people who don't know about it, their minds are kind of blown that a band like that was on the same label as like King Diamond.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy. I remember when we signed the Metal Blade, I was like, I mentioned it to my parents, like, oh, that's really cool. Not really knowing Metal Blade's place in the music world, but I'm like, yeah, Mom, remember the Goo Goo Dolls? And she's like, oh yeah. I was like, yeah, they were on this label. And then for her, it was like, her eyes widened. It like blew her mind to think that her son's band was on the same label as the Goo Goo Dolls. So yeah,
it finally made it in her eyes.
It finally made it, exactly.
That is incredible. I love it. Thanks, Goo Goo Dolls, for making a mother proud of her son. You mentioned
absolutely.
You mentioned a couple of the metalcore bands from their roster, As I Lay Dying, Unearthed. Were those inspirations for you when you're playing?
Not quite, to be honest. We kind of influentially pull from a different world. Mm-hmm. But I think as far as like their place in history, as far as like I mentioned before, like kind of bringing this kind of metalcore, this sound kind of to the masses, it was really interesting to see growing up, especially, when those bands were kind of big and gaining steam. I was, in high school and whatnot, and I was more of just like a straight up hardcore kid. I loved all the Rev bands, Youth of Today, the Gorilla Biscuit, stuff like that. So, As I Lay Dying and Unearthed, they weren't necessarily like in my wheelhouse, but it was still something interesting to see kind of take shape and kind of come to fruition, because a lot of kids that we were around were like, whoa, this is cool, this is hardcore, So yeah, they weren't necessarily like bands that influenced Harm's Way, so to speak, but it was something that we were aware of as we were kind of growing up and whatnot, and kind of watching this explosion happen.
So what first attracted you to the straight edge lifestyle?
For me, I grew up very much in a household where kind of like addiction was present, from, just straight up addictive behaviors to, substances of abuse. So, for me, I watched a lot of that kind of unfold growing up. And luckily, I had older sibling who exposed me to to straight edge hardcore, and it was kind of like the perfect time and place for me to come into contact with something like that, and we're talking like age 14, 15 for me. So in many ways it was almost like a protective thing for me, while I was kind of watching a lot of addiction unfold in front of my eyes, both like in my immediate family, extending all the way to like my, peers in high school and whatnot. I was able to kind of cling on to something and feel at home with something like straight edge hardcore. It just made sense to me because I was watching all this destruction unfold in front of my eyes. And then, I found, aggressive, heavy, angry music, like, and there was straight edge, and it just made sense. It felt like a great union. And like I said, like, it was very much like a safe passage for me because it kept me out of kind of, experimenting with drugs and alcohol and kind of falling down, this pipeline of addiction.
I'm straight edge as well. I've actually been straight edge probably for about 16, 17 years now.
That's awesome.
Started in high school, and it's always nice to meet other people and speak with other people that are straight edge as well. I don't have to deal with it now that I'm a bit older, but especially like high school and definitely college, always having to deal with people who don't respect your decision to not drink and do drugs. How did you deal with people not respecting your decision?
I was pretty lucky because there was just, when I got into straight edge, I like kind of showed a bunch of my friends it. Like, for example, like Bo, who plays in Harm's Way, he was, we grew up together. We went to high school together. He was also straight edge, and that was from just us, like, listening to music and exposing each other to like similar kind of, similar bands and like this straight edge ideology, and it kind of spread throughout our high school. So we had like a good chunk of kids who were like into straight edge music and into punk rock and into hardcore, so that was like our own little social circle. And we were kind of insulated, and it put us in this bubble where, if people didn't want to kind of fuck with us, so to speak, because, we didn't party in that way or we didn't drink or whatever, it didn't matter because we had each other. So it was, like I said, it kind of created this safe passage for not only myself, but a lot of my peers in high school where, we weren't necessarily exposed to a lot of destruction or self-defeating behaviors. So that was really beneficial for me, and that was really beneficial for some of us. Mind you, come senior year, a lot of people had fallen off, but, people just came to accept you for who you were, even, obviously, I'm 30 years old now, I've been straight edge for upwards of 15 years. A lot of people, like at that time, like it was a much larger deal to be straight edge or to break edge than it is now, so to speak, So, looking back to high school, looking back to those younger years, it wasn't hard to be straight edge for some of us because we had each other and we didn't necessarily have to deal with kind of the bullshit and the blowback that, some people have to deal with for kind of going against the status quo, so to speak.
Yeah, college was no fun for that, just meeting random douchebags and having them find out that I don't drink and having them say, yo, I'm going to get you drunk, bro. It's like, I just met you and I already hate your guts. So yeah, I think you lucked out a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. And like, come college, this is when like kind of, Harm's Way started. And it's funny, like if you go back to the Harm's Way demo, there's a lot of kind of pent up aggression and rage against kind of like jocks and frat boy culture. We even had a song called Frat Boy Stomp at the time, and it was just kind of about, having away with frat boys. And, it was, it made college not so hard either because like we just, we had a good kind of circle of like straight edge friends and people to hang out with, like, and at that time Harm's Way started, and it was just, it felt cool to be part of something. And in many ways, Harm's Way started as like a big pushback against kind of college, and kind of like the whole culture of drinking and partying that kind of comes with it for some people.
Interesting. I mean, you mentioned like the lyrics on the first record kind of being a pushback against the jocks, but I mean, your bandmate James is, I mean, looking at him, he's definitely appears to be a jock. Do, do you guys find the time to hit the gym when you're on tour, or are you able to wait a month and a half?
Yeah, no, we, James and I, we try to stick to a pretty kind of strict workout routine, but we are pretty flexible with that because, sometimes it's just hard. But, we try to hit the gym, at least 3-4 times a week. And, we have YMCA memberships, which is one of the most, readily available places to work out across the United States. So, yeah, we try to stick to like a routine. And obviously physical fitness is great, but for us, like, working out and kind of physical exercise is good for us mentally, especially because of all the kind of like the stress and the monotony that you kind of deal with on the road sometimes. So yeah, we try to stick to kind of working out and lifting weights and kind of trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle as best as we can on the road, just to kind of mitigate kind of burnout and just, kind of getting over exhausted, physically and mentally.
What does nutrition look like on the road? I imagine it's a little bit difficult when like you're miles and miles between nothing but a McDonald's.
Yeah, it could definitely be tough. But we'll say that, Chipotle is a godsend for many of us. We're a band with a pretty diverse kind of dietary kind of makeups. I'm vegetarian. We have a couple of vegans. James is clearly a carnivore, but like Chipotle is kind of offers everything for everyone, and it's fairly healthy. But mind you, it is pretty difficult when you're in the middle of nowhere and you got to kind of settle for a Taco Bell or settle for McDonald's, which for me means I can't eat anything, and for others means they can simply literally eat nothing. But yeah, we do the best we can by like kind of just bringing protein bar, trying to prep some food along the way, just to kind of deal with those long stretches where you're just not around anything that is super healthy and or sustainable.
There is always the meatless Big Mac as an option. Have you ever seen that?
I have not, but it sounds like a whole lot of bread.
It's lettuce and bread.
Lettuce and bread. Okay, I'll have to make note of that one, but I don't know how well my body will respond to it.
Soggy bread covered in mayonnaise. That sounds amazing.
Oh, incredible. Yeah.
So what do you do when you're not harm's waying?
Yeah, so I'm a social worker when I'm home. I kind of work in the field of addiction and mental health, doing kind of individual therapy and group therapy. So that takes up a large chunk of my time when I'm home between tours. I'm luckily in a position where I work for an agency that kind of lets me come and go and kind of follow, a couple different passions I have in my life. But yeah, kind of working in the field of mental health and addiction treatment is a big part of my life.
That's a really interesting, I guess, kind of a disconnect from the vibe of your band, which is very overtly negative and in a lot of ways like anti-human. How do you square that circle?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, Harm's Way is very much a release for all of us, especially a release of negative emotions. So, James is kind of in a profession as a teacher where he's working alongside people. Bo kind of works in customer service. I obviously work in a very intimate kind of setting with people. So yeah, like, based on our kind of like professional choices, people think, wow, you guys really like people. And we very much do. We very much do, but, having said that, we are human beings and we deal with obviously aggression and anger and like a lot of these kind of difficult emotions. And Harm's Way is a place where we can obviously healthily release those emotions, so to speak, and healthily process a lot of things, that we deal with on a day-to-day basis in our personal lives, to our professional lives, so on and so forth. So while it may seem like this inherent sort of contradiction, so to speak, I like to think of them as kind of like very interlocking components, and in many ways, like kind of serve similar functions. Like through Harm's Way, we've kind of, while there is kind of like this pessimistic sort of dystopian lens that some of the songs may seem to filter through, we've honestly connected with a lot of people and through our music and impacted people in many ways. And like, that's been a privilege, meeting people on the road and kind of meeting fans who've kind of who've been impacted by our music in a positive way, and for me, and the work I do, a lot of it's relational and a lot of it's, impacting people in other, positive ways. Right. So in some ways, like it almost feels like one and the same, even though on the outside, like I said, it may seem like this kind of inherent contradiction.
I wanted to ask you, the song Breeding Grounds includes a clip from one of my favorite movies as I was a kid. It's a claymation Satan saying the line, "People have no value," from The Adventures of Mark Twain, which is just one of the, I guess, strangest things I've ever shown people. What was the decision to use that particular bit? Just, it seems like a real left field grab.
Yeah, it was kind of a video that we had been exposed to like years and years and years back before even we had recorded Breeding Grounds, or even recorded Isolation. So I remember just like kind of going through the lyrics that James had, and it just seemed like thematically it seemed like it fit, and it was creepy and weird. So yeah, we kind of plugged it in, and it's kind of become one of these staple kind of samples that we've used as a band. Yeah, I'm sure like for people who know where it's from, it's probably like, whoa, that's really crazy and really weird and very, very, very left field. And it's always cool to hear when people know its origins. So yeah, it was just something that, we made like a mental note of some years back. And like I said, thematically, it just kind of seemed to fit pretty well with the song.
That's awesome.
There's been sort of a revival in hardcore over the past couple of years. It kind of hit maybe a lull somewhere in the mid-2000s, but with Harm's Way, Code Orange, Turnstile, Jesus Piece, like This Is Hardcore Fest, there's kind of really been an upswing in bands and people being interested in it. Why do you think that's happening now?
It's hard to say. I think there's this, I don't know, like it seems like it comes in kind of waves where people are paying attention to hardcore. And and you saw it in the 90s, you saw it in the early 2000s, you're seeing it again now where like hardcore is kind of getting this, more recognition, say, from mainstream circles. And, I honestly, I don't know like what it is, but in many ways, it's just, I think people are just yearning for something that's like real and something that has its own culture, so to speak, because so much of mainstream music is just garbage and cookie cutter, but you have a lot of cool bands who are like talking about real things now, especially with our current cultural climate, our current political climate. And I think, it's just appealing more to the masses again, maybe, but, I honestly don't have like a concrete answer for that, but it's cool to see, it's cool to see our peers getting the recognition that they deserve. It's cool to see real music making its way on the Grammys or kind of making its way on, major media outlets. And, hopefully it continues in that direction because, I think it's great, as long as people are just kind of maintaining their integrity and obviously, ethically still acting and living in the kind of in that light of kind of punk rock and hardcore, so it's not something that just gets commodified and just prepackaged and just becomes more of the status quo.
What do you want from hardcore in 2018? I guess, like, what direction do you want to see it go from here? I would love to see it just continue to be an inclusive space, and I would actually love to see just more, just and an inclusive space not only for people but for like bands, right? Like, I think it's really awesome when you can see mixed bills, and not only just like metal bands and hardcore bands, but more like punk rock bands and say metallic hardcore bands, like being able to play the same shows and being able to vibe on the same things kind of ethically. So,
I think more inclusion is a very positive thing as far as like kind of growing the scene, especially coming from a place like Chicago, which is in many ways like a very segregated scene as far as like punk and hardcore is concerned. I'd love to see just more inclusivity, like across the board, across the United States, across Europe, as far as just hardcore and punk rock and kind of different genres that fall within that umbrella or under that umbrella.
I think the European, at least the big metal festivals that they have in the summer, have enough room to be a little bit more inclusive. You'll see some of the older bands, thrash, punk, whatever. I think America hasn't really ever taken to that. Sometimes you'll see a hardcore band on a metal bill with 4 or 5 other bands, and people seem to not get into it. I don't know if there's anything that we could do here to really change that unless we like force it to happen.
Right. Yeah. I think, it's a difficult kind of bridge to cross, and it's hard. There's a lot of pretentiousness that exists within, different musical genres and stuff. And I think that kind of creates barriers for people to be open-minded in checking out bands. And, just to kind of piggyback on what you had said, just about kind of these metal bills with hardcore bands, we've definitely been in those spaces. We've been doing a lot of crossover tours, and we're a band that has a lot of metallic influence. So like for some crowds, we're going to go over better than others. But in some regards, when people even hear that we're a hardcore band or that we have any sort of hardcore influence, you can kind of see like the cotton balls go in their ears and people kind of turn their backs on you. Yeah. So, and we've been in those shoes where, we've done crossover tours and done amazing, and we've done others. And it's like, you feel like you can hear crickets in the room, so to speak. So yeah, I would just, it would just be great to see a little more inclusivity and just open-mindedness around just heavy music in general, and just, especially in the punk and hardcore world, and even in the metal community.
You mentioned being from Chicago. I lived there for a few months a while back, and one of my favorite places to go was Kuma's Corner.
Oh yeah.
Which, if our listeners don't know, is an awesome burger place that names all of their burgers after metal bands. Have they done one for Harm's Way yet?
Yeah, actually they did back in like 2013, 2014, like around then, like when Blinded, our EP before Rust came out. Yeah, they ended up doing like a limited kind of Harm's Way burger. That was pretty cool. I remember it specifically had fried avocado, which I'm a big fan of. But yeah, we were lucky enough to kind of get on their menu, and we kind of went in one night, and they kind of treated all of us to some burgers, and it was a really cool experience. Being a vegetarian, there's not much I can eat there. Like they do a veggie burger, and they can kind of accommodate you as best as they can. But it's a cool place, and obviously to be a part of their menu was really cool.
So they didn't consult you on it or anything like that?
No, it just kind of turned up one day. We're just like, whoa, what? and apparently they don't really do much consulting with bands on their burgers that end up on their menus. From what I hear, I think they kind of take a fuck you approach to it, like love it or leave it. But yeah, for our burger, it just kind of showed up one day, and we were like, "Oh, sick! We're on their menu, cool." And when we did show up to try the burger and just hang out, they were honestly really cool and kind of treated us and invited us in and gave us a pretty warm welcome.
Nice. Well, you might have this opportunity with Posthuman to really break through to a bigger metal audience. This big debut on Metal Blade. Do you have big tours planned for this year?
Yeah, we're shortly after Posthuman is released, we're going out on a full U.S. tour. It's a headliner with support from Ringworm and Vane and Queensway. So yeah, we'll be out on a month on that record doing a full U.S. tour, and I believe there's a Canadian date as well. After that, we're looking to actually doing like a short run of Mexican show. Like we're going to Mexico for 5 shows, and then after that, we're planning on going over to Europe to do some shows in Europe, and that's kind of in the booking process right now. But after that, we're really we should be on the road all summer long. We're planning on doing a bunch of support stuff for Posthuman, a lot of crossover stuff for Posthuman. And we're also looking to get back to, Japan, Australia, Southeast Asia, some more obscure places that we were able to hit on the Rust cycle that, we had a great experience in.
That's awesome. Well, on February 9th, you'll get your opportunity to pick up Posthuman. You can pre-order it now from Metal Blade, and it promises to be a pretty good time. I have one last question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure.
I've heard your band and other bands described this way. What do you think of the term Entombedcore?
Entombedcore? I mean, my gut reaction is, that sounds kind of silly. But obviously, we are a band that was heavily influenced by Entombed, at certain stages of the band. There was, HM2s on our records and whatnot, but yeah, as far as Entombedcore, it's kind of silly, I think. But Entombed is Entombed, right? I mean, Wolverine Blues, Left Hand Path, Clandestine. I mean, they're pivotal records that have, obviously shaped, many band sounds, throughout the years. So, I mean, I guess it's, in some ways it's a respectful sort of label, but, for us to get labeled in that way, I mean, whatever, people have thrown a number of different labels on Harm's Way, and, we kind of just roll with it.
So this is a very silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I've seen the band's name spelled with an apostrophe and without an apostrophe. For the record, which way do you spell it?
For the record, we always spell it with an apostrophe. It's grammatically correct. I like to pride us all on being fairly educated individuals. We know how to properly spell our name. For aesthetic reasons, our logo has never had an apostrophe. And that's simply just, to present it in the way that we want to present it, visually. But as far as press is concerned, we're always using an apostrophe. There's been some kind of mix-ups on like the PR side of things where, certain publicists have forgot to use the apostrophe, or, like iTunes might not have it. And that's just been like hiccups and just kind of, people kind of dropping the ball in certain ways on properly, kind of using our name in the context of media and whatnot. But to set the record straight, we're very much into grammar, and the use of apostrophes, and Harm's Way is always spelled with an apostrophe.
There you have it, nerds. Use an apostrophe. Chris, is there anything that you would like our audience to know before we let you go?
Nothing comes to mind. February 9th will be the release of Posthuman, and people can expect to see us across the globe. We're planning on hitting this tour, this cycle on Posthuman pretty hard. We're going to be touring relentlessly. So, if we're in a city near you, come check it out.
Hell yeah! Thanks so much for joining and talking to us today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot.
You're listening to 66.6 FM, Radio TOVH, The Flush.